Good morning. Happy snow day. I am going to read to you another book illustrated by Floyd Cooper. This book is titled Ma Deer's Aprons. So, does the cover remind you of other books illustrated by Floyd Cooper? What do you think? Okay. I'm going to read to you the author's notes. I recently inherited a plain muslin apron that had belonged to Leanna, my great grandmother. And although the design is ordinary, the woman who wore it was not. Ma Deer, a short form of Mother Deer, as Leanna was affectionately called, was a single parent who raised 3 children in rural Alabama in the early 1900s. She made a living cooking, cleaning, washing, and ironing for other people. These were breaking chores. More difficult, of course, because there were no electric irons, washing machines, or other modern appliances, and the pay was very low. My grandmother often told me about her remarkable mother who worked hard yet always found time for her children and grandchildren, sharing funny stories, teaching them songs, playing games, no matter how tired or sore she was. These memories inspired me to write this story, in which the real Ma Deer stories, songs, and games are included. Here, then, is my tribute to my great grandmother and also the countless other domestic workers of her generation. From them, the apron was a convenient, all purpose tool used to carry wood and kindling, to gather eggs and vegetables, to wipe their brows in the noonday sun, or just to hide a special treat for a willing helper. David Earl always knows what day of the week it is. He can tell by the clean, snappy, fresh apron Ma Deer is wearing, a different one for every day. Monday. David Earl knows it's Monday because Ma Deer puts on her blue apron, the one with the long pocket across the front. It's wash day, and that's where she keeps the clothespins. First, Ma Deer heats water in the big kettle and pours it into several tubs. Then she rolls up her sleeves and scrubs each piece on her rubber board. David Earl would rather blow bubbles, but instead he gathers peach tree leaves for Ma Deer to use in the last rinse. That's the secret to my bright wash, Ma Deer explains as they hang out the sheets. So what do you notice about David Earl so far? Does he play while Ma Deer is working, or does he help her? And then how does he help her? At day's end, when the last sweet-smelling piece has taken off the line and folded, Ma Deer rests in a rocking chair. Her hands are red and chafed. She's so tired, yet she holds out her arms. "Come," she says. David Earl crawls into his mother's lap. She reaches inside her blue apron pocket and takes out a wooden clothespin. "Once there was a brave soldier," she begins. The clothespin becomes the soldier standing at attention. "Who died fighting out west?" David Earl looks at the flag and sword hanging over the mantel. His name was Sergeant David Earl Bramlett Sr., the same as mine, except I'm a junior, he adds, finishing the story he's heard many times before. Too soon, it's time for bed. Ma Deer kisses her son goodnight, and he drifts off to sleep, wrapped in a wind-dried sheet that smells of peach blossoms. So, who was the story about that Ma Deer told David Earl? Tuesday. "Why do you always wear your yellow apron on ironing day?" David Earl wants to know. "Yellow is the color of the sun," Ma Deer answers, "and sunshine makes me feel good, even when I have to iron all day. It's Tuesday, and 6 baskets of clothes sit by the fireplace. Several sizes of irons are being heated over hot coals. David Earl gets to press a few practice pieces. No cat faces now, his mother reminds him. He knows she'll check for any little wrinkles that looks like whiskers on the pieces that have been ironed. Remembering how she's taught him, David Earl scoops a handful of water from his bowl and sprinkles it over the fabric. Then he irons and irons and irons. See, no cat faces, he says, holding up his handiwork. Oh, my goodness, Ma Dear replies, laughing at the scorching rag. The day is long and hot. Ma Dear dips the corner of her apron in the cold water and wipes David Earl's face. With the other corner, she wipes her own. At last, ironing day is over. All the baskets are filled and ready for delivery. David Earl lies fast asleep on the pallet near the door. A night breeze cools the room. Ma Dear covers the boy with her apron and blows out the candle. Wednesday. After breakfast on Wednesday, Ma Dear ties on her green apron with the hidden pocket, the treasure pocket. David Earl calls it. The boy helps his mother hitch their wagon to Gracious. They load the baskets, then set off across the railroad tracks to the other side of Avery, where all the rich people live. Ma Dear lets David Earl hold the reins, but Gracious knows the way. His mother rides looking straight ahead and has told David Earl to do the same. But as they pass, he can't help sneaking a peek at the big chandelier inside the Grand View Opera House. So a chandelier is a large, fancy light that hangs from a ceiling. Why do you think it catches his eye? The mayor stops in front of a large mansion on the corner of Main and Tucker Streets. David Earl stands quietly beside Ma Dear at the basement door, while Mrs. Hillenbach carefully checks the laundry. Your work is good, the woman says flatly, placing a quarter in Ma Dear's hand. Then casting her eyes down to David Earl, the woman adds, You may have a peach off my tree if you want. The boy stands erect and lifts his head proudly the way Miss Dear says his daddy did. No, thank you, he answers. On the way home, Ma Dear makes her usual stop at Hanson's General Store, where she buys a few staples and one treat. That evening, after David has finished helping with the dinner dishes, she reaches inside her apron. Look what I found, she says, pulling a penny peppermint stick from the treasure pocket. So let's review a bit. So what work did Ma Dear and David do on Monday? What work did they do on Tuesday? Wednesday? So what do you think they'll do the rest of the week? Let's find out. Thursday, when the southbound passenger train rumbles through Avery on its way to Huntsville, David Earl knows it's Thursday. And when the sun tops the big spruce like a silver ball, he knows it's noon. Come noon Thursday, Ma Dear puts on a cheerful pink apron and they go to visit the sick and shut in. But first, Ma Dear and David feed the hens and chicks and gather eggs. Then they pick a dozen ripe red tomatoes, some okra, and a couple of cucumbers from their garden. We're going to take these to Madame Pearl, Ma Dear says. David Earl is happy because Madame Pearl is so interesting. She was once a famous singer who performed concerts on 3 continents. All she has left now are her piano, her photo albums, and lots of memories. Madame Pearl, did you really sing for the Queen of England? The boy asks when they get there. The proud and dignified woman slides to the piano stool. Her fingers know how to find the right keys. The Queen herself requested that I sing a spiritual, she remembers. They tell me she had tears in her eyes when I finished Deep River. David Earl imagines he is on a huge concert hall filled with 3 chandeliers as big as, no, bigger than, the one in the Grandview Opera House. Queen Victoria is seated in her box. Madame Pearl bows gracefully and begins in a high, clear voice. Deep River Lord, my home is over Jordan. Oh, Deep River Lord, I want to cross over into campground. The music stays in David Earl's head the rest of the day, and that night, just before he falls asleep, he hears Mama Dear humming the same melody as she sews by candlelight. Friday. Oh no, it's Friday again, says David Earl when he sees Ma Dear tie on her brown apron. Brown so it won't show dirt, she explains. On Fridays, Ma Dear cleans the house for Alexander family over in Mission, about 5 miles from Avery. David Earl has to go along. You're too young to stay home by yourself, she says, so don't even ask. Alton Montgomery gets to stay home alone. Alton Montgomery is not my son. But finish your breakfast so we can go. But no more buts, Ma Dear says in her new no-nonsense voice. And stop whining. David Earl gets his oatmeal in silence. Once they get to the Alexander, Ma Dear is not so angry anymore. The house is big, but not nearly as grand as the Hillenbach mansion. Ma Dear says the Alexanders are expecting to be rich people, but they're not rich yet. Mrs. Alexander leaves a long list of things for Ma Dear to do. While she works, Ma Dear teaches David Earl a new song. Inch along, like a poor inchworm. She covers her face with a handkerchief. His face with a handkerchief. Then she covers her own face with her apron. They beat the rugs, shovel ashes out of the fireplace, and scrub floors. When they stop for lunch, Ma Dear takes a piece of string from her apron pocket. She makes a Jacob's ladder, a crow's foot, and a cup and saucer. David Earl tries to make the string designs, but they don't come out right. Back at work, Ma Dear goes upstairs. She changes beds, dusts and sweeps every room. Meanwhile, David Earl pretends he's an inchworm as he pulls weeds from Mrs. Alexander's flower garden, slowly moving down each row of blooms. At sunset on the way home, David Earl keeps trying to make the strings designs. With a little help, he makes Jacob's ladder. I did it, he says, and does it again and again. So, Ma Dear says that Alexanders are expecting to be rich people. So, if they're expecting to be rich, what are some things that they might count on happening? Do you think those things are sure to happen or not? Maybe we'll find out. On Saturday, Ma Dear bakes pies, wearing her flowered apron. She and David Earl gather apples out back. Ma Dear can peel a whole apple without breaking the skin. Throw it over your shoulder, she says, and it will form the last letter of the name of someone who loves you. David Earl does, and like magic, the peeling forms the letter J. Ma Dear winks her eye. See, I told you, Ma Dear's name is Jonelle. When the pies are all baked and cooled, Gracious pulls Ma Dear and David Earl to the train station where passengers buy every last one. At home, Ma Dear puts a coin in a small container at the top shelf of the cabinet. For your schooling, come next year, she says. Then it's bath time. Ma Dear puts on an over-the-head gray apron. She pours hot water into a round tub, and David Earl flaps his arms, splashing water everywhere. Look, I'm a big fish. You're a big mess, Ma Dear says. Just look at my floor. She pours in more hot water and gives him a good scrubbing from head to toe. Are you going to hang me out to dry like the sheet? I should, Ma Dear answers with a gleam in her eye. But instead, she adds, I'm going to tickle your toes until you can say, Jack wick whack, stick ball a smack, tick tack mick mack, skip scat jack. Between giggles, David Earl tries to repeat the tongue twister, but he can't say it fast enough. I give up, he cries, gasping with laughter. Ma Dear dries him and herself with her big gray apron. Come now, have a slice of apple pie. Sunday. A church bell rings in the distance. That's how David Earl knows it's Sunday. Ma Dear has a week of workday aprons, one for every chore, but she never wears an apron on Sunday. This is your no work day, says David Earl, pulling on the pants Ma Dear has made. Soon as he's put on his one pair of shoes, Ma Dear brushes his hair. After service, why don't we take our supper down to Sutter's Mill Creek, she says. Can I fish? If you fish on Sunday, you'll catch the devil, Ma Dear says, adjusting her hat. David Earl glances up at the flag and soared over the mantel and smiles. Did Pa fish on Sunday? He asks as they hurry out the door. So, why doesn't Ma Dear have an apron on Sunday? And why do you think David Earl isn't allowed to fish on Sunday? And then let's look at our very last picture. What do you think is happening in this picture? We've read another book that ended kind of like this recently, where it showed just a picture and no words, but it gave us a lot of information, didn't it? Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed our book for today.